I swear I'll kill you myself and you won't live to see the day. That's what my SEAL Admiral snarled as he shoved my head under the freezing black water, his fingers locked around my throat, my lungs collapsing, my vision fracturing into white sparks. The river was black as tar beneath me, and I could feel my consciousness slipping away like sand through my fingers. And just when I thought my story would end beneath that river, a single gunshot cracked across the shoreline. And a voice thundered through the night, "Black Phantom, your order is received. You're safe now." Before we continue, like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from so our community can welcome you. Who is Black Phantom? Why does a single call sign freeze a SEAL Admiral mid-murder? And why did someone fire a warning shot to save me? The answers to these questions will tear your heart out and rebuild it stronger than you ever thought possible. My story begins in the shadows, where it was always meant to begin. I was raised by a father who served in clandestine operations so classified that even today, decades later, I can't speak their names without risking everything I've built. My childhood wasn't filled with bedtime stories and warm milk. Instead, it was shaped by strange visitors who appeared at our door in the dead of night, their faces hidden beneath baseball caps and sunglasses, even in darkness. Secret conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. Late-night disappearances where my father would vanish for weeks, sometimes months, leaving behind only a kiss on my forehead and the lingering scent of gun oil and fear. I learned to read the tension in my mother's shoulders when she didn't know if he was coming home. I learned to decode the relief in her eyes when his silhouette finally appeared in our doorway, battered but breathing. And I learned that some people carry darkness not because they choose to, but because someone has to. My father never told me what he did. He never had to. I could see it in the way he checked every lock twice before bed. I could see it in the way his eyes constantly scanned every room he entered, cataloging exits and potential threats. I could see it in the nightmares that made him cry out in languages I didn't recognize, fighting enemies that existed only in the hellscapes of his memory. When I was 16, they told us he died during an unknown operation, officially ruled an accident. A training exercise gone wrong. Equipment malfunction. The kind of sanitized, bureaucratic language that sounds official but means absolutely nothing. They handed my mother a folded flag and a medal in a wooden box, and they expected that to be enough. They expected us to accept their lies and move on with our lives like good little military families are supposed to do. But at his funeral, as I stood there in my black dress watching them lower the empty coffin because they couldn't even give us his body, I discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in the lining of his dress uniform, sewn in by hand with surgical precision, was a small patch. It was no bigger than a silver dollar, made of black fabric with silver thread that caught the light like starfire. The words were simple but devastating. Phantom Unit. I spent hours that night researching, digging through military databases, calling every contact my family had in the service. The answer was always the same. That unit doesn't exist. Never has. You must be mistaken. But I wasn't mistaken. That patch was real. My father's blood was real. And the hole in my heart was real enough to swallow the moon. That's when I made a vow that has defined every single day of my life since. Standing in that cemetery at midnight, with rain soaking through my funeral dress and lightning splitting the sky above his headstone, I swore on his grave that I would discover what killed him. And I would finish whatever mission he died trying to complete. The path to that truth led me straight into the mouth of hell, the Naval Academy. From the moment I walked through those doors, I faced doubts that cut deeper than any blade. Hostility that burned hotter than any fire. Men whispering behind my back that I only got in because of my dead hero father. They said I was riding his coattails. They said I didn't belong. They said I was too weak, too emotional, too female for their brotherhood of warriors. Every single day, I heard their whispers. Every single day, I felt their eyes dissecting me, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to prove their prejudices right. They wanted me to fail so badly they could taste it. They needed me to fail because my success would force them to confront the uncomfortable truth that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as special as they thought they were. So I outworked them. When they did 100 push-ups, I did 200. When they ran 5 miles, I ran 10. When they studied for 2 hours, I studied for 6. I didn't just meet their standards, I shattered them. I didn't just pass their tests, I rewrote the answer keys. I earned the top scores in mental operations training, the kind of psychological warfare preparation that separates the elite from the merely good. While my classmates struggled with basic tactical theory, I was mastering the art of thinking 3 steps ahead of enemies who hadn't even revealed themselves yet. I learned to anticipate moves that hadn't been made, to counter strategies that existed only in potential. "She thinks like a ghost," one instructor whispered to another after I completed a simulation that had stumped every other cadet in my class. He thought I couldn't hear him, but I heard everything. I always heard everything. And that's when the nickname sparked, Phantom Girl. At first, they meant it as an insult. A way to other me, to mark me as something strange and unnatural in their testosterone-fueled world. But I wore it like armor. I embraced it like a battle cry. Because they were right. I did think like a ghost. I moved like a ghost. And ghosts, as they would soon learn, are impossible to kill. My real education began when I entered the Black Phantom training gauntlet. This wasn't the sanitized, regulation-approved preparation they give to regular naval officers. This was something darker, more brutal, more unforgiving than anything the academy had shown me. This was training designed to forge weapons, not soldiers. The first test was escape and evade drills in swampland that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. They dropped me in the middle of a Louisiana bayou at 0300 hours with nothing but the clothes on my back and a single objective: reach the extraction point 50 miles away without being caught by the hunter teams tracking me. The water was thick with alligators and water moccasins. The air was thick with mosquitoes that swarmed like tiny vampires. And somewhere in that green hell, teams of highly trained operators were hunting me with thermal imaging, night vision, and bloodhounds. I spent 3 days moving through water that reached my chest, breathing through hollow reeds when the helicopter searchlights swept overhead. I ate raw fish I caught with my bare hands and slept standing up against cypress trees because lying down would have made me vulnerable to the things that hunted in the darkness. By the time I reached that extraction point, I was covered in leech bites and mosquito welts, but I was alive. And more importantly, I was unbroken. The next test was water torture resistance, ironic, considering how my story ends. They strapped me to a board and tilted my head back until the water filled my nose and mouth and lungs. The panic is immediate and overwhelming. Your body screams that you're drowning, that you're dying, that you need to do anything, say anything to make it stop. But I held on. I held on because I knew my father had endured worse. I held on because breaking would dishonor his memory. I held on because somewhere in the darkness behind my closed eyelids, I could feel him watching me, urging me forward. They tried for 6 hours to break me. 6 hours of simulated drowning, of gasping and choking and feeling my consciousness slip away only to be yanked back by the cruel mercy of air. When they finally unstrapped me, the interrogator looked into my eyes and saw something that made him step backward. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "She's not even human." But he was wrong. I was human. I was painfully, desperately, completely human. But I was human in the way that steel is human, forged by fire until it becomes something stronger than what it started as. Zero visibility underwater navigation came next. They dropped me into a tank of murky water with obstacles and dead ends, and told me to find my way to the exit using only touch and instinct. The water was cold enough to stop my heart and black enough to swallow light itself. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. I couldn't tell up from down. All I could do was feel my way through that liquid maze, inch by terrifying inch, fighting the claustrophobia that tried to claw its way up my throat. I found the exit. But more than that, I found something deeper, the absolute certainty that no matter how dark the world became, no matter how lost I felt, there was always a way through. Always a path forward. Always hope hiding in the shadows. Night infiltration with no night vision gear tested something different. Not just my physical abilities, but my capacity to become one with darkness itself. They sent me into a compound guarded by motion sensors and infrared cameras, with orders to retrieve a target and escape without triggering a single alarm. I had to move like smoke, think like shadow, breathe like stillness itself. For 4 hours, I crawled across gravel that cut my knees and palms. I squeezed through gaps barely wider than my shoulders. I held my breath for minutes at a time as guards passed within inches of my hiding spots. And when I finally reached that target, a simple manila envelope that might as well have been the Holy Grail, I understood something profound about my father's world. This wasn't just about physical skill or mental toughness. This was about becoming something more than human, something that could exist in the spaces between reality and nightmare. The final test was psychological interrogation simulation, and it nearly destroyed me. They put me in a room with no windows and no clocks, where the lights never dimmed and the temperature shifted randomly between freezing and sweltering. For days, though I lost count after the first 72 hours, they bombarded me with questions about missions I'd never been on, people I'd never met, crimes I'd never committed. They told me my father was a traitor. They told me he had sold out his own teams. They told me he deserved to die and that I was just like him. They brought in actors pretending to be my mother, begging me to confess to things I hadn't done. They played recordings of screaming children and told me I could save them if I just signed the confession. But I didn't break. Even when they showed me photographs of bodies they claimed were my father's teammates, men who had supposedly died because of his betrayal. Even when they brought in a priest to administer my last rites. Even when they put a loaded gun on the table and told me I had 1 minute to use it on myself before they used it on me. I didn't break because breaking would have meant accepting their version of truth. And their version of truth was poison designed to kill everything pure inside me. My father wasn't a traitor. He was a hero. And heroes don't raise daughters who crumble under pressure. When they finally admitted the test was over, when they finally turned on the lights and opened the door and told me I had passed, I walked out of that room changed. Not broken, changed. Hardened like carbon under pressure until I became something crystalline and unbreakable. My reputation grew from that moment forward. Silent. Precise. Impossible to track. Impossible to shake. Other trainees started avoiding me, not out of disrespect, but out of something approaching awe. I moved through the training facility like a legend in the making, and everyone could sense it. Phantom Girl evolved into something more. Something deeper. Something that carried weight in the shadow world where real decisions were made. Instructors who had trained thousands of operators over decades started using me as the standard by which all others were measured. Do it like Phantom, they would say. Think like Phantom. Move like Phantom. And then came the recruitment that changed everything. It happened quietly, without fanfare or ceremony. A man in an unremarkable suit appeared at my barracks one evening after lights out. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain who he worked for. He simply handed me a folder and said 4 words, "You're ready for more." Inside that folder was an invitation to join an unmarked unit. No insignia. No records. No roster. No official acknowledgement that it existed at all. The kind of unit that operates in the spaces between the lines of official military doctrine. The kind of unit that handles problems too sensitive for conventional special forces. There was only one rule, printed in stark black letters on cream-colored paper. You are seen by none. You are named by none. That is where I earned the real call sign. That is where I became Black Phantom. The transformation wasn't instant. It was a gradual erosion of everything civilian that remained inside me, replaced by something harder and more necessary. We operated in countries that don't exist on maps, against enemies who don't exist in official reports. We prevented wars that the public will never know almost happened. We eliminated threats so quietly that the threats themselves never realized they had been eliminated. I learned to speak 7 languages fluently and understand 12 more. I learned to kill with my bare hands in 14 different ways. I learned to disappear so completely that surveillance cameras would somehow malfunction whenever I passed by. I learned to read micro-expressions and voice patterns and the 1,000 tiny tells that reveal when someone is lying, scared, or planning something violent. But more than any technical skill, I learned to carry the weight of secrets that could topple governments. I learned to sleep at night knowing that my actions in the darkness kept innocent people safe in the light. I learned to be a ghost in service of the living. For 3 years, I was the perfect weapon. Invisible, effective, utterly loyal to the mission. I completed operations that existed only in the memories of the handful of people cleared to know about them. I became exactly what my father had been, a protector in the shadows, a guardian that the world would never know it needed. And then I discovered something that changed everything. Again. During a routine intelligence gathering operation, I uncovered documentation that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Reports filed by Admiral Thomas Richardson, the same Admiral Richardson who supervised my final Naval Academy evaluations. The same Admiral Richardson who had signed off on my Phantom unit recruitment. The same Admiral Richardson who was now my direct superior in the chain of command. The reports contained intel about operations my father had been involved in. Operations that had gone wrong. Operations where good men had died because someone had falsified critical intelligence. Someone had changed mission parameters without authorization. Someone had knowingly sent teams into situations where success was impossible and survival was unlikely. That someone was Admiral Richardson. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Radio transcripts where he gave orders that contradicted the official mission briefings. Financial records showing payments from sources that had no business funding American military operations. Most damning of all, a personal journal where he detailed his reasoning for each betrayal. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Some missions are worth more than the men who die completing them. My father had been investigating him. My father had been gathering evidence. My father had been preparing to expose the corruption that was getting American operators killed. And Admiral Richardson had had him murdered for it. The equipment malfunction that killed my father wasn't an accident. It was assassination. Clean, professional, and completely deniable. The kind of elimination that only someone with Richardson's clearance level and access could have orchestrated. I spent weeks verifying every detail, cross-referencing every source, building a case so airtight that not even Richardson's political connections could save him. Then I did what my father would have done. I exposed him. I submitted the evidence through proper channels. I followed protocol to the letter. I dotted every I and crossed every T, because I knew that men like Richardson don't fall unless the case against them is absolutely perfect. And it was perfect. The evidence was overwhelming. Richardson was removed from his deployment rotation pending investigation. His security clearances were suspended. His access to classified operations was revoked. In the space of a single week, 30 years of carefully built reputation crumbled into dust. But Richardson wasn't the kind of man who accepted responsibility for his actions. He wasn't the kind of man who quietly disappeared into retirement and disgrace. He was the kind of man who blamed everyone except himself for his downfall. He blamed me. In his mind, I had destroyed his legacy. I had ruined his life. I had taken everything he had worked for and burned it to the ground out of spite and vindictiveness. The fact that everything I had done was justified, that he actually was corrupt, that he actually had gotten good men killed, that he actually deserved to be exposed, meant nothing to him. What mattered was revenge. And he swore he would have it. I should have known he would keep his promise. I should have anticipated that a man willing to betray his own teams would eventually betray me too. But I was still operating under the naive assumption that there were lines even corrupt officers wouldn't cross. I still believed that some boundaries were sacred. I was wrong. The night it happened started like any other training exercise. Night river operations in North Carolina, designed to test our underwater navigation and combat swimming capabilities. Standard procedure called for mixed teams, multiple safety observers, and emergency extraction protocols. What I didn't know was that Richardson had quietly adjusted the exercise parameters. Instead of mixed teams, I was assigned alone. Instead of multiple safety observers, there was only one, Admiral Richardson himself. Instead of emergency extraction protocols, there was only the dark water and the man who wanted me dead. I should have sensed something wrong the moment I saw him waiting at the riverbank. Richardson never personally supervised training exercises. He was a desk officer, a politician in uniform who hadn't been in the field for years. But there he was, clipboard in hand, telling me that my training partner had been reassigned at the last minute. "Just you and me tonight," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. One-on-one training. Personal attention from the Admiral. Consider yourself honored. The water was December cold and black as motor oil. I slipped into it wearing full gear, wetsuit, diving mask, underwater breathing apparatus, and enough weights to keep me submerged during the exercise. The plan was simple. Navigate underwater to a series of checkpoints marked by chemical light sticks, then surface at the extraction point 200 meters downstream. I made it through the first 3 checkpoints without incident. The water was murky but navigable, cold but manageable. I was actually enjoying the exercise. There's something peaceful about moving through underwater darkness, something that connects you to the vast mystery of the deep. My breathing was steady, my movements efficient, my mind calm. That's when Richardson changed the rules. I was surfacing to check my position when his hands locked around my throat. Not the throat of my wetsuit, my actual throat, skin to skin, with the kind of grip that meant business. The kind of grip that meant death. "I swear I'll kill you myself and you won't live to see the day," he snarled, his face twisted with 3 years of accumulated hatred. "You destroyed my life, you little bitch. You ruined everything I worked for. And now I'm going to ruin you." He shoved my head under the water with violent force, using his superior weight and leverage to keep me submerged. His fingers dug into the soft flesh of my neck like steel cables, cutting off my air supply and crushing my windpipe. The breathing apparatus was torn from my mouth in the struggle, leaving me with only the air already in my lungs. Panic hit like lightning. My body knew it was dying and activated every survival instinct at once. I clawed at his hands, trying to break his grip. I twisted and thrashed, trying to break free. I kicked upward, trying to reach the surface. But Richardson was bigger, stronger, and positioned perfectly to keep me underwater. The cold black water filled my vision and my nose and my mouth. My lungs began to burn with a desperate need for oxygen. My muscles started to cramp from the lack of air and the icy temperature. My thinking became fuzzy and disjointed as my brain began shutting down non-essential functions to preserve what little oxygen remained. I could feel my strength failing. I could feel consciousness slipping away like water through my fingers. My vision began to fracture into white sparks and kaleidoscope patterns. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird trying to escape. And that's when I saw him. My father's face appeared in the darkness behind my eyes, as clear and real as if he were standing right in front of me. He looked exactly like I remembered him, strong jaw, kind eyes, the little scar on his chin from a childhood accident. But there was something else there too. Something that looked like approval, like pride, like love that transcended death itself. "Not yet," his voice whispered in my mind. "Your mission isn't finished yet." I don't know if it was hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation or something deeper and more mysterious. I don't know if the dying mind creates its own comfort or if the dead really do watch over us in our darkest moments. All I know is that seeing his face gave me the strength to fight for 10 more seconds. 20 more seconds. 30 more seconds. And 30 more seconds was all I needed. A gunshot cracked across the water like thunder. Not the sharp crack of a pistol, but the deep boom of a high-powered rifle. The sound echoed off the water and the trees, multiplying until it seemed like an entire army was firing at once. Richardson's grip loosened instantly. His head whipped around toward the shore, his eyes wide with shock and fear. In that moment of distraction, I managed to break free and surge toward the surface, gasping and choking as my head broke through into the blessed air. That's when I heard the voice. It thundered across the water with absolute authority, the kind of command presence that makes grown men stand at attention even when they can't see who's speaking. Black Phantom, your order is received. You're safe now. The effect on Richardson was immediate and devastating. His face went pale as moonlight. His hands began to tremble. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land, but no sound came out. Because he recognized that voice. And more importantly, he recognized what that voice represented. The man speaking was Colonel Marcus Hayes, though I wouldn't learn his identity until much later. Hayes was a legend in the shadow world, a man so deep in the black operations community that most people weren't even sure he existed. He reported directly to people who reported directly to people who had the president's personal phone number. And Richardson had just attempted to murder one of Hayes' most valuable assets. The colonel's voice carried across the water again, calm and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than preventing a murder. Admiral, I suggest you step away from my operative and return to shore. We have much to discuss. Richardson's face cycled through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Shock gave way to fear. Fear gave way to anger. Anger gave way to desperation. And finally, desperation gave way to the cold realization that his military career was over and his freedom was likely forfeit. He looked at me one last time, treading water just a few feet away. The hatred in his eyes had been replaced by something worse, the hollow emptiness of a man who had finally pushed too far and lost everything. This isn't over, he whispered, but we both knew it was. I swam to shore under my own power, my throat aching and my lungs burning, but my mind crystal clear. Colonel Hayes waited for me at the water's edge, a tall, lean man in civilian clothes who looked more like a college professor than a warrior. But his eyes told the real story. Those were the eyes of someone who had seen every kind of darkness the world had to offer and survived to tell about it. Are you injured? He asked, offering me a towel. Nothing permanent, I managed to croak out. Good. We need to talk. What followed was the most important conversation of my life. Hayes explained that my Phantom Unit activities had been monitored by an even more classified organization, a group so secret that it didn't have a name, only a purpose. They existed to protect America's most valuable intelligence assets from threats both foreign and domestic. My investigation into Richardson's corruption had triggered their attention. My exposure of his activities had earned their approval. And my near murder at his hands had convinced them that I was ready for the next level of service. Black Phantom isn't just your call sign anymore, Hayes told me. It's your new identity. Your official identity. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, the woman you used to be died in that river tonight. Black Phantom is who you are now. Richardson was quietly removed from his command within 48 hours. No dramatic arrest. No court-martial. No public disgrace. He simply disappeared from military records as if he had never existed. His pension was revoked. His decorations were stripped. His security clearances were burned. He became a ghost, but not the useful kind. I learned later that he spent his remaining years in a small apartment in Delaware, drinking himself to death while obsessing over conspiracy theories about the people who had destroyed his life. He died alone and unmourned, a cautionary tale about what happens when corruption meets accountability. But his removal was just the beginning of my transformation. Word of what had happened spread through the covert operations community like wildfire. Not the official version. There was no official version, but the whispered truth that passes between operators in the dark spaces where real work gets done. SEALs started talking about the woman who had survived an admiral's murder attempt and emerged stronger than before. Intelligence officers shared stories about the operative who had exposed corruption at the highest levels and lived to tell about it. Special Forces soldiers spoke in hushed tones about Black Phantom. The one they couldn't kill, the one they called when the mission couldn't fail. My legend grew in the darkness where legends are born. I became the operator who could infiltrate any facility, eliminate any target, complete any mission. I became the ghost story that kept enemy agents awake at night, wondering if that shadow in their peripheral vision was real or just their imagination. But more than any reputation or legend, I became something deeper. I became the living embodiment of my father's legacy. Every mission I completed honored his memory. Every life I saved in the darkness justified his sacrifice. Every moment I spent protecting the innocent validated his belief that some things are worth dying for. I was transferred to the most classified wing of military intelligence, a place that doesn't appear on any organizational chart and doesn't exist in any official capacity. My new assignments took me to places the public will never know about, to prevent conflicts the historians will never write about, to eliminate threats the politicians will never acknowledge existed. I learned to operate completely outside the normal chain of command, accountable only to people whose names appear in no government directory. I learned to make decisions that could affect the course of history, knowing that if those decisions went wrong, there would be no backup, no support, and no acknowledgement that I had ever existed. But I also learned something else. I learned that the darkness I operated in wasn't just about violence and death and necessary evils. It was also about protection and service and love for people who would never know they needed protecting. Every terrorist plot I disrupted meant families who would never know they had been targeted. Every enemy agent I eliminated meant soldiers who would never know their positions had been compromised. Every piece of intelligence I gathered meant politicians could make informed decisions instead of blind guesses. I was a guardian angel with blood on her hands. A protector who worked in shadow so others could live in light. A weapon that chose its own targets based on conscience rather than orders. And then came the night that brought everything full circle. I was returning from a successful operation in Eastern Europe, details I still can't share, even now, when I received an encrypted message directing me to report to a specific set of coordinates. When I arrived, I found Admiral Richardson waiting for me at a pier overlooking the Potomac River. He looked terrible. 3 months of disgrace and forced retirement had aged him 20 years. His uniform was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting civilian suit. His command bearing had crumbled into the hunched posture of a broken man. But his eyes still held that familiar hatred, dulled now but not extinguished. "I needed to see you," he said without preamble. I needed to say something. "Say it quickly," I replied, my hand instinctively checking the position of the tactical knife concealed in my jacket. "I have places to be." He looked out over the dark water for a long moment, gathering his thoughts or his courage or both. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the sound of waves lapping against the pier. "I know what you think of me. I know what everyone thinks of me. Corrupt. Treacherous. A man who betrayed his own people for personal gain." He paused, struggling with words that clearly caused him physical pain. "And you're right. About all of it." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "But I need you to understand something," he continued, turning to face me directly. "When I tried to kill you that night, it wasn't really about you. It was about me. About my failures. About the fact that a young woman had accomplished what I never could. She had chosen honor over advancement, truth over convenience, service over self-interest." His voice broke on the last few words, and I realized he was crying. Not the dramatic sobbing of someone seeking sympathy, but the quiet tears of genuine remorse. "Your father was a better man than I ever was," he whispered. "And you're a better soldier than I ever dreamed of being. I destroyed my own career. I ruined my own life. And I tried to kill you because I couldn't face the truth about who I really was." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made my heart stop beating. It was my father's Phantom Unit patch. The same one I had found in his uniform lining all those years ago. The same one that had started me on this journey. "I took this from his effects before they were returned to your family," Richardson admitted. "I told myself I was protecting classified information. But really, I was stealing the last piece of evidence that he was a better man than me." He held the patch out toward me with trembling fingers. "I can't give you back your father. I can't undo the things I've done. But I can give you this. And I can tell you the truth, he didn't die because of equipment failure. He died because he was about to expose me. And he died knowing that someday, someone would finish what he started." I took the patch from his outstretched hand, feeling the weight of years and secrets, and finally answered questions. The fabric was exactly as I remembered it, black as midnight, with silver thread that caught the moonlight like captured stars. "He would be proud of you," Richardson continued. "Proud of who you've become. Proud of what you've accomplished. Proud that his daughter grew up to be exactly the kind of soldier he always dreamed of being." And then he did something I never expected. He dropped to his knees on that pier, his civilian suit soaking up water from the wet planks, and he saluted me. Not the sharp, crisp salute of military protocol, but the slow, deliberate salute of respect earned through blood and sacrifice. "Black Phantom," he said formally, "I request permission to be dismissed." I looked down at this broken man who had killed my father, who had tried to kill me, who had betrayed everything he had sworn to protect. I thought about hatred and revenge and the satisfying weight of justified anger. I thought about all the ways I could destroy him further, all the pain I could cause him, all the vengeance I could extract. And then I thought about my father, about the kind of man he had been, about the values he had tried to instill in me, about mercy and forgiveness and the strength it takes to choose healing over hatred. "Permission granted," I said quietly. "Go home, Admiral. Find a way to live with yourself." He struggled to his feet, his knees shaking with effort and emotion. He looked at me one last time with eyes that held no hatred now, only the hollow exhaustion of a man who had finally stopped running from his own conscience. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." And then he walked away into the darkness, leaving me alone with my father's patch and the weight of finally understanding what real strength looked like. I never saw Richardson again. I heard through unofficial channels that he spent his remaining years trying to make amends, volunteering at veterans' hospitals, donating his remaining savings to military families in need, writing letters of apology to the families of the men who had died because of his corruption. It wasn't enough to balance the scales, but it was something. He died 2 years later, quietly and without fanfare. No military funeral. No flag on his casket. No mourners beyond a handful of people from the Veterans Hospital where he had volunteered. But the nurse who was with him at the end told me he died clutching a photograph of the men who had served under him, including my father. His last words, she said, were, "I'm sorry." As for me, I continued my work in the shadows. My mission didn't end with Richardson's downfall or his death or even his redemption. If anything, it expanded. I became not just Black Phantom, but the standard by which all future Phantom operatives would be measured. I trained new recruits in the arts of invisible warfare. I mentored young operators who reminded me of my younger self, hungry for justice, burning with purpose, carrying wounds that would either destroy them or forge them into something stronger than steel. I completed operations on every continent, against threats both foreign and domestic. I prevented wars, stopped assassinations, gathered intelligence that kept America safe from enemies the public will never know existed. I became the ghost in the machine, the shadow in the darkness, the silent guardian that democracy needs, but can never officially acknowledge. But more than any specific mission or operation, I became something that my father never lived to see. The living proof that his sacrifice meant something. Every life I saved honored his memory. Every threat I eliminated justified his death. Every moment I spent protecting the innocent validated his belief that some fights are worth dying for. His patch sits on my desk as I work, a constant reminder of where I came from and why I do what I do. The silver thread has faded with age, and the black fabric shows the wear of years, but its message remains as clear as the day I first discovered it. Some people choose to operate in darkness so others can live in light. My call sign stopped being just a nickname years ago. Black Phantom became my identity, my purpose, my entire reason for existing. I am the weapon that chooses its own targets. I am the guardian that protects people who don't know they need protection. I am the living embodiment of my father's legacy, carrying forward his mission in ways he never could have imagined. And every night, when I close my eyes after another successful operation, I can feel him watching over me. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a presence that transcends death itself. A father's love that survived betrayal and murder and corruption to guide his daughter toward her true destiny. I am Black Phantom. I am the daughter of a hero. I am the guardian in the shadows, the protector in the darkness, the weapon that serves justice rather than power. And I will never stop fighting for the light. If this story shocked you, inspired you, or opened your eyes to the silent warriors who protect us, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Our community is global and growing stronger every day. These are the stories that matter. These are the truths that need to be told. These are the heroes who operate in darkness so others can live in light. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss these stories. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone like Black Phantom is standing between you and the monsters that hunt in the darkness. And you deserve to know their story.